When my eldest son started sleepwalking at around 8 or 9, I initially brushed it off as a phase that many children go through. It was a common phenomenon, or so I had heard, unsettling but ultimately harmless quirks of childhood. As a light sleeper, I was accustomed to waking up at the slightest noise, so it didn't take long for me to realize that my son had developed this unusual habit. Most nights, I'd awaken to find him standing in the hallway, swaying slightly on his heels and shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes were open, but there was an emptiness in his gaze that made my skin crawl. It was as if he was standing in front of me yet looking through me, into some realm I couldn't access. For anyone who has lived with a sleepwalker, you understand the bizarre nature of those moments. His expression was blank, and sometimes he would mumble incoherent words, barely audible, while other times he would simply stand there, breathing steadily. Each time I found him like that, I would gently guide him back to bed, whispering soothing words, assuring him that everything was fine. In the morning, he never recalled any of it, and I convinced myself it was just a quirk of childhood. Months passed, and one night, I was jolted from sleep by a rhythmic tapping sound. It resembled water droplets falling steadily against a window, but the weather was calm outside. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but as I lay there, the sound persisted, steady, deliberate, and far too precise to be simply the house settling. Curiosity overcame any sense of fear, and I decided to investigate. Sitting up, I looked toward the door, where the sound originated. My husband slept soundly beside me, and I hesitated to disturb him. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway, my heart racing. That's when I saw my son, his forehead rhythmically tapping against the wall, as if he were trying to push through it. His fingertips grazed the surface in tandem with his forehead, a strange, eerie dance that made my heart race. "Buddy?" I whispered, but he didn't respond. As I stepped closer, a chill ran through me. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, gently shaking him to pull him from whatever trance held him captive. He blinked, took a step back, and then, as if nothing unusual had happened, let me lead him back to bed. In the morning, he had no memory of the incident. Over the next few months, this strange behavior became less frequent, and eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking ceased, and the unsettling moments in the hallway faded into a distant memory. That is, until my younger son began to show similar signs years later. At first, I dismissed it as another phase. Kids often mimic each other, and I didn't think much of it. But as time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. My youngest would stand in the hallway, shifting his weight the same way his brother had, his eyes open but unfocused. The slow, eerie rhythm of his movements mirrored those of my eldest son, sending an unsettling wave of nostalgia through me. One night, I woke to the familiar tapping sound again. My heart sank as I realized what I would find. I stepped into the hallway and found my younger son, forehead pressed against the wall, knocking softly as if trying to break through. The sight was hauntingly reminiscent of his brother's past behavior. "Hey, buddy," I called softly, but he remained unresponsive, lost in his own world. Panic gripped me, and I touched his shoulder, shaking him gently. He finally came to, and I led him back to bed, trying to convince myself it was just a phase that he too would outgrow. And just like that, the sleepwalking stopped. He had no recollection of it either. Years passed, and I nearly forgot about those unsettling nights. But now, with my sons away at college, the house felt eerily quiet. My husband and I decided it was time for a renovation. Our home, old and worn, needed a fresh start. We stripped the wallpaper, painted the walls, and replaced the floors, nothing too intensive, just a little rejuvenation. While peeling away the old wallpaper, we stumbled upon something unexpected. At first, I thought it was just old backing paper or a stain, but as we peeled further, my breath caught in my throat. It was an antique mirror, covered for reasons unknown. Why would someone cover a mirror instead of removing it? The thought seemed absurd, yet as I stood there staring at the reflection of myself, unease washed over me. And then it hit me, the mirror was positioned exactly where my sons had bumped into the wall all those years ago. Memories flooded back, and I stood frozen in shock. There was no logical explanation for why they would have known it was there. They couldn't have seen it, they were unconscious during those sleepwalking episodes. But somehow, both of them had independently tried to walk into something that was impossible to see. My heart raced as I recalled the eerie rhythm of their movements. I immediately decided to get rid of the mirror, but the unsettling feeling lingered. What if the mirror had some connection to their sleepwalking? What if it was a portal to something beyond our understanding? As I pondered these questions, I realized I was facing a growing anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had been a part of something deeper, something I had yet to comprehend. In the days that followed, I became more consumed by the mirror's mystery. I researched sleepwalking and the psychology behind it, trying to find a rational explanation for the coincidences that haunted my family. I scoured the internet for stories of others who had experienced similar phenomena, but nothing seemed to fit. Then, one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I felt a cold draft sweep through the house. The air felt charged, almost electric, and I shivered involuntarily. It was as if the house was alive, responding to the memories of those nights long past. Suddenly, I heard a soft tapping sound echoing through the hallway. My heart raced as I recognized it immediately. With trembling hands, I got up and walked toward the sound, dread pooling in my stomach. As I reached the hallway, I saw an apparition, a shadowy figure resembling my eldest son, standing in the same spot he had all those years ago. I blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving me standing in silence. My mind raced with questions. Was this a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light? Or could it be something more sinister, a reminder of the mirror's lingering presence? I quickly returned to the living room, trying to dismiss what I had seen. My husband returned home shortly after, and I confided in him about my encounter. He listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Maybe it was just your imagination, he suggested gently. You've been stressed with the renovations. But what if it wasn't? I countered, my voice rising slightly. What if there's something in this house that we've uncovered? Something we should be worried about? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Let's not jump to conclusions. We've had a lot of changes happening here. It could just be your mind playing tricks on you. I wanted to believe him, but the unease lingered. That night, I had trouble sleeping, tossing and turning as the memories of my son's sleepwalking episodes replayed in my mind. Why had they both exhibited the same behaviors? Why had they been drawn to that specific spot in the hallway? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was somehow connected to everything. I decided to dig deeper into its history. I visited local antique shops, seeking information about its origins. I learned that mirrors in old houses often carried superstitions, tales of spirits trapped in reflections, or mirrors acting as gateways to other dimensions. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned home, determined to confront the mirror. I stood in front of it, gazing into the glass, searching for any sign of what lay beneath its surface. It was just a mirror, I told myself, but the air around it felt thick, charged with energy that made my skin prickle. As I stood there, I felt compelled to speak. If there's something you want to show me, then show me, I whispered, half expecting nothing to happen. But as I stared into the depths of the mirror, I saw a flicker of movement. My breath caught in my throat as the image of my sons appeared, their faces twisted in expressions of fear and confusion. I stumbled back, heart racing. What was happening? Was this a vision, or was the mirror simply reflecting my own anxieties? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I needed to understand what was happening, but I also felt an overwhelming urge to rid my home of the mirror once and for all. That evening, I gathered my husband and told him everything. With a sense of urgency, we decided to dispose of the mirror immediately. We wrapped it in a thick blanket, ensuring it wouldn't shatter, and loaded it into the car. As we drove to the edge of town, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders with every mile we put between us and that mirror. Upon reaching a secluded spot by the river, we carefully set the mirror down. I looked at my husband, who nodded in understanding. Together, we pushed the mirror into the water, watching as it sank beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. As we drove home, the atmosphere in the car felt lighter, devoid of the heaviness that had plagued us. I thought about my sons, who had long since outgrown their sleepwalking. Perhaps it was time to let go of the past and embrace the present. The following weeks were filled with a newfound sense of peace. The memories of my son's sleepwalking faded, replaced by the laughter and joy of our family. I finally felt free from the shadows that had loomed over us for so long. But then, one evening, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a familiar sound, the rhythmic tapping. My heart sank as I realized it was back. I got up, dread pooling in my stomach, and stepped into the hallway. To my horror, I found my youngest son standing there, swaying slightly, eyes vacant. I rushed to him, shaking him awake, my heart racing. "Not again," I whispered, fear tightening around my chest. As he blinked and looked at me, confusion clouded his face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. "It's okay, buddy. You were just sleepwalking," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a phase. The mirror may have been gone, but its lingering effects had returned. And as I guided my son back to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that our home still held secrets, waiting to be uncovered. The cycle may not have ended, it had merely transformed. In the months that followed, I became determined to protect my family from whatever forces were at play in our home. I researched sleepwalking and sought guidance from professionals, but nothing seemed to work. I began to fear that the mirror had left a mark on our family, a connection that couldn't be severed so easily. Then, one night, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed something strange in the hallway, a faint glow emanating from that very spot where my sons had once stood. My heart raced as I approached. The glow intensified, illuminating the walls with an otherworldly light. I felt drawn to it, a compulsion urging me to step closer. As I neared the spot, the air around me seemed to shimmer, and I could hear whispers, fragments of words I couldn't quite comprehend. Suddenly, I realized I was standing on the very spot where the mirror had once hung. The same energy that had drawn my sons to the wall now enveloped me, and I felt a strange connection to the house, as if it were alive and aware of my presence. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the wall. As my fingers made contact, a vision flooded my mind, a glimpse into the past. I saw my sons, not just in their sleepwalking states but experiencing something deeper, something tethered to the house itself. I pulled back, gasping, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. I needed to understand what had happened, to break the cycle once and for all. That night, I began to write everything down, every memory, every detail of the strange events that had unfolded in our home. I felt a sense of urgency, as if the house was trying to communicate something to me. As I poured my thoughts onto the page, I began to see a pattern emerge. The mirror, the sleepwalking, the tapping, everything was connected. It was as if the house had its own story, a narrative woven into the very fabric of our lives. In the weeks that followed, I continued my research, determined to uncover the truth. I talked to neighbors, delving into the history of our home, and pieced together a story that had long been forgotten. I learned that the house had once belonged to a family that had suffered great loss, a tragedy that had left a mark on its walls. The mirror, it seemed, had been a focal point for their grief, a portal through which their pain had lingered. With this new understanding, I felt a sense of resolve. I gathered my family and shared everything I had discovered. We stood together in the hallway, united in our determination to reclaim our home and break the cycle that had haunted us for so long. Together, we conducted a small ceremony, lighting candles and speaking words of healing and closure. As we did, I felt the energy shift in the air, a palpable release of tension that had hung over us for years. In the days that followed, the tapping ceased, and the shadows that had loomed over our home began to fade. My sons no longer sleepwalked, and we found a renewed sense of peace. Eventually, I came to understand that our home was not just a structure, it was a living entity, shaped by the memories and emotions of those who had come before us. We had learned to honor that history, to embrace the lessons it offered, and in doing so, we had found our own way forward. The mirror may have been gone, but its legacy lived on in our newfound connection, a bond strengthened by our shared experiences and the love that had always been at the heart of our family. As I looked back, I realized that sometimes, the things we fear the most can lead us to the greatest revelations. And in the quiet moments of the night, when the world was still, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us to this place of understanding and love.